We like to believe that the world is a finished map, a solid grid of coordinates where every here leads to a known there. But there are gaps in the map, invisible seams where the glue of reality has started to peel away. Airports are the most vulnerable of these places, existing as liminal spaces, gateways that belong to no one and nowhere. I learned this on a Tuesday night at Heathrow while waiting for a flight that would never depart from our world. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, vibrating frequency that seemed to itch behind my eyes. I was exhausted, hovering in that strange state of delirium where the edges of the room begin to blur and soften. I looked up at the massive digital departures board, expecting to see the usual list of European capitals and long-haul hubs. Instead, the screen flickered, a glitch of emerald green and dead black cutting through the text. Between Zurich and Abu Dhabi, a new line materialized in a font that looked jagged, almost handwritten. Gate 0, destination, Alén, boarding now. I frowned, rubbing my eyes, thinking it was a coding error or perhaps a joke by a board technician. But when I looked again, the entry was still there, pulsing with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Curiosity is a dangerous thing when you are tired. It acts as a key that fits into locks you should leave alone. I picked up my carry-on and began to look for signs for Gate 0, assuming it was a new subterranean terminal. The main concourse was bustling, filled with the sounds of rolling suitcases and frantic announcements. But as I followed the arrows pointing toward the lower-level gates, the noise began to drain away like water from a sink. The bright duty-free shops were replaced by blank white walls and heavy steel doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. I passed a janitor mopping a floor that was already bone dry, his movements slow and mechanical. I asked him where Gate 0 was, but he didn't look up. He just pointed a trembling finger down a corridor that seemed too long to fit inside the building. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a faint scent of wet concrete and old, forgotten paper. Finally, I reached a heavy industrial lift with a brass plate that simply had a 0 etched into it. The doors opened with a groan of protesting metal, revealing an interior lined with mirrors that looked tarnished and gray. As the lift descended, I felt a strange pressure in my ears, the kind you feel when a plane climbs too fast. When the doors opened again, I wasn't in an airport anymore, at least not the one I recognized. The terminal was vast, shadows clinging to the high, arched ceiling like thick black cobwebs. A single row of flickering lights illuminated a path toward a lonely boarding gate at the end of the hall. There were no shops here, no advertisements, only rows of plastic chairs covered in a thin layer of fine gray dust. A woman stood behind the counter at Gate 0, wearing a uniform that looked like a pilot suit from the 1940s. Her skin was the color of parchment, and her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere behind my left shoulder. I handed her my passport, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't scan the document. She simply ran her thumb over my photo and whispered, "The transition is beginning." She handed it back, and I noticed my reflection in her dark pupils looked distorted, like a figure seen through cracked glass. I walked down the jet bridge, which felt soft underfoot, as if the floor were made of something organic rather than metal. The plane waiting at the end was an unmarked vessel, painted in a shade of gray that seemed to absorb the light around it. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me, a mixture of stagnant ozone and the metallic tang of blood. The cabin was full, every seat occupied by passengers who sat in absolute, terrifying silence. They were dressed in clothes from different eras, faded suits, Victorian dresses, and modern hoodies, all muted to shades of charcoal. None of them turned to look at me. They stared straight ahead with eyes that were wide and glassy. I found my seat near the back and buckled my belt, the click of the metal sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. There were no flight attendants, no safety demonstrations, and no pilot's voice crackling over the intercom. The engines didn't roar to life. Instead, they began to moan, a low guttural sound like a giant animal in pain. The plane began to move, but I didn't feel the vibration of wheels on asphalt. It felt like we were sliding over silk, a smooth, frictionless glide into the dark. I looked out the window as we ascended, expecting to see the glittering lights of London or the dark expanse of the Atlantic. But there were no lights, and there was no ocean. Below us, the earth was dissolving into a thick, swirling fog of static, like a television tuned to a dead channel. The clouds weren't white or fluffy. They were jagged, gray masses that looked like shards of broken stone. I looked at the flight tracker screen on the back of the seat in front of me. The map showed a blue dot over the middle of the ocean, but the coordinates were flickering between numbers and symbols that didn't exist. "The flight tracker says we are over the ocean," I whispered to the man sitting next to me. "My eyes say we left the earth," I finished, my voice trembling. The man didn't move, but a single tear of black fluid leaked from his eye and ran down his pale cheek. I stood up, desperate to find someone who was truly alive, but the aisle seemed to stretch and grow longer as I walked. I reached the cockpit door and pushed it open, hoping to find a pilot who could explain this nightmare. The cockpit was empty, the controls moving by themselves, guided by invisible hands. Out of the front windshield, I saw our destination, Alén. It wasn't a city, but a sprawling, decayed metropolis of infinite gray towers that pierced the static sky. There were no trees, no sun, only a dim, eternal twilight that felt like the end of all things. I realized then that this wasn't a flight to another country, but a deportation from reality itself. We were the discarded thoughts of the universe, the passengers who had slipped through the cracks of the world. As the landing gear began to descend with a sickening crunch, I looked back at the other passengers. Their mouths were now open in silent screams, their bodies beginning to turn into the same gray dust that covered the terminal. The plane touched down on a runway made of ash, and the doors hissed open to a world that had forgotten the color of the sun. I am writing this on a scrap of paper I found in the seat pocket, hoping it might somehow find its way back through the seam. If you are ever in an airport and you see a gate that shouldn't be there, do not follow the signs. The world we know is a fragile bubble, and once you pop it, there is no coming back. The engines have stopped, and the passengers are starting to stand up. They are looking at me now, and they are smiling.